Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Welcome to Ask Rob and Rob. We love answering your property questions, and that's what we do every Tuesday. We've got a couple of good ones coming up, but first, here's how you get in a question of your own.
You can go to our website, propertyhub.net/ask. That's propertyhub.net/ask. And you can record a message that way. Or you can leave us a voicemail on 013 808 00035. Whatever you prefer, both super simple. And Sian has followed that method to a T and left us this great question. Let's have a listen.
Hello, Rob and Rob. My name is Sian and I'm calling from Wiltshire. I am a fairly new property investor and I'm approaching the time where my first tenants are coming up for 1 year in the property. I'm wondering if you can give me some advice, please, on how I go about setting an annual increase to the rent, whether there is a sort of calculation that people do in general, whether I just use the standard inflation rate, or whether there are other things that I should be taking into consideration. The tenancy is going very well. I don't want to rock the boat, but I also don't want to find myself 5 years down the line realising that I'm not getting a market value for the property. So any advice you can offer would be very gratefully received. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's a really interesting question. And it's particularly a challenging one for me because this is something that I haven't done. You mentioned not wanting to rock the boat, and that's my attitude as well. So my tendency is to just not increase the rent during a tenancy. And generally, that's okay. Because, for example, in the properties I own that are city centre apartments, you tend to not get tenants staying for more than a couple of years. They'll move on for some reason. Either they're students or they want to move to somewhere bigger, or they're friends who go their separate ways. And so you don't have people who are in there for a long period of time, and the rent can get really out of whack with where it would be if it were in line with the market. However, I do have some where I have tenants who have stayed there for a long time, and their rent is now well out of line with where it should be. And that's okay. I'm far more interested in having good tenants in there who are reliable and no bother, rather than sort of squeezing every last penny out of everything. But you do get into this situation where it's got so far that it is difficult to ever bring it back into line again. So that's what I do, which is not much. But what you probably should do is get in the habit of having small increases. And you can approach that in different ways. You can either link it directly in your tenancy agreement to the rate of inflation, to RPI or something like that. Or you can just kind of on an informal basis say to them, look, I'm minded to increase the rent by 5% this year. As you know, inflation is currently 7%. And so how do you feel about that? You can do it either way, but having it as a conversation every year driven by something rather than just ignoring it like I do is probably the best way to go with it. I would, however, say don't be driven purely by increasing in line with inflation, because you have to be mindful of the market in your local area. And although rents track inflation and wages over the long term, they can bounce around for reasons relating to local supply and demand and things like that. So it may be the case that you're looking for a rent increase that the market just doesn't justify right now. So before doing anything, I would say look to the local market and be honest about where your rent should be sitting. It's not necessarily the case that it should be going up every year based on the market. Also be aware that I think there should be a bit of a discount for tenants who remain in situ for a couple of reasons. One, it's almost like a kind of loyalty bonus. They've proven themselves. You know that there's going to be a lot of cost, a lot of hassle with replacing them, so you'd rather not. And also, the property that they're living in now is not the property that they moved into. If they move, they could probably move into somewhere that has just been professionally cleaned, maybe been refurbished a bit, and the property that they're in with you every year is getting a little bit less new and shiny. So that's something to factor in as well. So that's quite a long answer with various things to think about and no actual answer, but hopefully I've given you some things to think about, and the main lesson is don't take my approach.
Time for our next question now, and this person's not left their name, so I'm going to call him Donald.
Hey Rob and Rob, just calling in to get your quick thoughts about large tower blocks, cash-only tower block properties, and how you think they'll kind of appreciate in the future. At the minute, a lot of lenders are shying away from lending to that type of property, and I guess you get a bit of a discount if you are a cash buyer nowadays. If you invested now, I was just wondering if you ever thought, if lenders would kind of ease things up, or if you think that there's any kind of possibility of that changing in the near future and then kind of getting a bit more of a gain when potential buyers open up. Any thoughts on that would be really great, as I'm looking to buy at the minute. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Donald. To answer your question, I think it's a good strategy. I think it's an interesting strategy anyway, although it's not for everyone, because there is a little bit more risk around this approach. Now, for background, to benefit everybody listening, the approach you're taking is that some blocks, in fact, many blocks, have had issues around cladding. And because of them needing to be refurbished or changes need to be made within the block, maybe with sprinkler systems or what have you, then for the time being, they are unmortgageable. Now, this doesn't apply to new blocks going up. The regulations have changed and all new blocks are compliant. So this isn't a strategy that would work on new builds. But Donald, I'm sure you know that, and I'm just letting everybody else know in case they were not aware. Right. So as a strategy, yes, it's a short-term window because all these blocks will get sorted out. But what I would say is really understand what you're going into, because not all blocks are created equal. And what I mean by that is the amount of work that is needed on each and every block will be different. Some potentially might come at a great cost to the residents. There's lots of talk about how the government may or may not intervene to help, but right now it's not clear whether that will apply to landlords or investors. So at the moment, you probably need to assume that it won't apply to you. That might change, but at the moment, that's what you should assume. Now, going into it, if you can find a block that doesn't need a lot of work and it's likely to be resolved in the not too distant future, and you can still see value in that block, then wow, what a great strategy. It's going to take more time, this strategy. It will need more research. You're going to have to first identify the properties that have issues, then understand the issues in detail. But if you're prepared to put that effort in, which I have no doubt you are prepared to because you've gone to the trouble of leaving a question, then I think it's a really interesting niche strategy that won't be around for long, but for those who are willing to work harder and put more effort in, it could be quite fruitful. Just beware that while there are properties that don't need too much work, there are some properties that need a lot of work at great expense and might take a number of years to be resolved, and you might want to avoid those properties unless the deal is just so good you don't care and you're happy to buy cash and refinance at some distant point in the future because you don't mind. Overall, I think it's a great strategy, and I think there are some easier wins in your strategy rather than challenging wins. And why not pick up the low-hanging fruit within this strategy? There is work to be done, but I think there are rewards to be gained as well. So good luck.
Well, there you go. 2 more questions answered, a bit more knowledge spread. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and we will be back, of course, with the Property Podcast on Thursday. So we look forward to seeing you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.